She sat on the end where she could put her drink down to play the game. In hindsight, I remember that he slipped behind her and then beside her as he continued to chat. I was talking to the other dude and was watching her beat me in the game, but I didn't care. We were having fun. It seemed like the birthday celebration was going off without a hitch, until I looked over at her blank eyes. The guys disappeared, and I knew something was horribly wrong. I was sitting beside her as we were celebrating her birthday. I had picked the place, I think. I'm not quite sure, maybe we'll ask her. I picked her up for our night of fun, and as we drove east, we chatted it up. And when we pulled into the parking garage, I didn't even pay attention to where we parked. That part would be important later, and probably still surprises nobody that I didn't know where we parked. But anyway, my own trauma was almost always related to alcohol. But I have never had the conviction that it is biblically wrong when used appropriately. And though it has never been super attractive to me, I was proud of my drink ordering skills when we arrived at our destination. I ordered us both an appletini and a full martini glass with a giant opening at the top. That's also something that will be important later. She grinned playfully, held up a $20 bill, and competitively told me that she was going to beat me at the game we were playing. About that time, two men flanked us. Neither of them seemed like a threat. Both of them were good looking, and they were, quote, in from out of town. She sat on the end where she could put her drink down to play the game. In hindsight, I remember that he slipped behind her and then beside her as he continued to chat. I was talking to the other dude and was watching her beat me in the game, but I didn't care. We were having fun. It seemed like the birthday celebration was going off without a hitch, until I looked over at her blank eyes. The guys disappeared, and I knew something was horribly wrong. I knew she had not had enough to drink to be so out of it, and I knew I needed to get her out of there. She couldn't walk. She fell out of the chair. I got her up. I think somebody helped me. I can't remember. But as I slung her arm around me to help her walk, the only word she could say was north. Go north. Other than that, there were no words. Her legs just would not work. So I walked north and we found the car, but not before I had to leave her by the elevators by herself because she could not walk. I got her in the car with a security guard that finally showed up, finally helped me because her 4 inches on me were serving to be incredibly problematic. I got her home and chalked the whole thing up to too much alcohol, even though I had seen nothing to indicate that. My own trauma, mostly related to alcohol, forced me out of her door and on my way home as fast as possible. I wish I would have just stayed 30 more minutes. My heart is stirred by a noble theme as I recite verses for my King. My tongue is the pen of a skillful writer. Psalm 45:1. Guys, thank you for listening to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. We are in season 2, and this is the place where we will chronicle stories of hope and healing that came from the crooked roads of trauma and pain. This season follows season 1, PTSD, Jesus and Me, where I have told much of my story and my journey with PTSD. And if you've not caught those episodes, I would encourage you to go back and do that. Also, I hope that you will find some hope and healing from the stories of other people as we go through season 2. And so without further ado, let's drop into this episode and my conversation with today's guests. Make sure you listen to the end though, because you never know when I may drop a Watson surprise on you. Also remember that for every podcast you listen to and every time you hear my voice, the promises of Joel 2:25 are being fulfilled in my life, where God is absolutely restoring all of the years that the locusts have stolen. So until then, my tongue will continue to be the pen of a skillful writer. Let's drop into this episode today. Today, it is with mixed feelings that I introduce the first guest of the second season of Wednesdays with Watson that we've named PTSD, Jesus, and You. Welcome, Chrissy. Thank you for being here. You're the first guest of season 2, where we're going to tell stories of hope and healing, but also the crooked roads that got us there. This is the story of your crooked road and the night that changed everything. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm to say I'm excited to share my story is probably not true, but I am hopeful that it will be helpful to someone.
It will be helpful to someone, and it will be hard, and I know people can already hear it even in my voice, but for those of you who maybe haven't listened to the first season, this guest will make more sense to you if you head to season 1 of Wednesdays with Watson. Chrissy is my memory keeper, and she is in several episodes, but suffice it to say that in my own trauma story, Chrissy is a precious gift from God in my own healing. So today is a bit of a flip of the switch. Chrissy, in your own words, and as little or as many as you want, what happened that night?
I only have a few snapshots of memories. I definitely remember the feeling of I can't get my legs to work. Like there was a disconnect between my brain and my legs. I also remember hyperventilating, blacking out, and throwing up, starting minutes after I initially looked at you and said, something isn't right here. And from there, that repeated over and over for what I assume was a couple of hours, all the way home for sure. In the car, it was...
Yes, I can concur.
Hyperventilating, blacking out, throwing up. On repeat, that's an hour. And then when I got home, it continued. I remember even it being so long of that pattern that I remember you being outside the bathroom door and saying, Chrissy, you're not throwing up anymore. Stop. You can come out of the bathroom. I think I just couldn't catch my breath. And that pattern, I remember feeling like instead of feeling better, it was getting worse. And it was just horrible. And I was confused by how I felt and what went wrong. And I just kept hyperventilating, blacking out, throwing up. But we finally got to sort of a point where you were able to get me to climb into bed. And for all intents and purposes, I was good at that point, and you went home. At some point, and I think it was pretty much instantly after you left, I got right back up and went into the same pattern of hyperventilating and blacking out, but there was nothing left to throw up at that point. But I had the thought in my head of, oh no, let me go grab Amy. And so I had been sitting and I jumped up to run out the front door to go grab you. And I remember thinking, uh-oh, I think I'm going to pass out. And instead of it being one of those slide down the wall, pass out.
This is not funny.
This is way more of a timber. I went and I just remember just that fall forward. And at that time, I had a desk that was glass and metal. I will never, ever, ever own a glass and metal desk again in my life. And of course, that's the corner I hit my head on my way down to the ground. So I've now conked my head, and I remember the first thought I had on the floor was, I didn't knock myself out. I'm okay.
Winner.
Right. And honestly, not knowing because nobody was there, I could have knocked myself out. That could have been when I woke up from being knocked out. But I immediately jumped up, still thinking that I could grab Amy, ran straight out my front door, and she had been gone probably for an hour at that point.
Easily.
Yeah, easily. Yeah. So no sense of time, no sense of how much time had passed. My guess is that at that point, I went back. I think I looked in the mirror, saw that I had hit my head and it was bleeding, but I climbed into bed and I think it was probably 4 a.m. And the next thing I remember is 9 a.m. And I sat straight up and I was awake and absolutely shocked that I was alive. And I had no lingering. I know a lot of times I read in books where it's like that, oh, I'm so groggy coming out of a fog. I had none of that. It was not my experience. When I was up, I was awake. I had blood pouring down my head.
The shiner you had.
I had blood in my eyes, but blood started flowing down my head as I woke up. I had defecated on myself. The reason I specifically mentioned that is it is another sign of being drugged versus just too much alcohol.
That was my next question to you, because clearly I drove us home.
Right.
We had drank the exact same amount.
Right.
I was legal to drive home.
Right.
And so the next morning I woke up thinking, what in the world? Because I barely knew you.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, did she drink a lot before I picked her up? Net, we know now that said gentleman drugged you.
Yes, correct. And drugged me with GHB.
Right.
The reason I'm sure of that is that I looked up the symptoms, and it specifically affects respiratory, and sometimes people just stop breathing and die. And second, it affects the connection between muscles. So the fact that I couldn't walk made sense too.
Or control your bowels.
Yes.
And if we're keeping it real, that's the last thing you do before you die. And so...
And then I found it interesting when I woke up that I started bleeding. It was almost like
your
the
body
blood
was like...
stopped.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And it came back alive. It felt like somebody had used the paddle boards on me. I mean, I sat up in bed like God breathed life back into me. It felt that much like I wasn't here and now I am. And I'm grateful to be alive. Obviously, it's called a date rape drug for a reason, but we got out of there and I am incredibly grateful for that. However, I almost died.
You almost died, and that's not the end of the story. So my next question, this is a podcast about PTSD. And it's a podcast for PTSD survivors and for those that love them. This next question is going to be Captain Obvious, but do you have post-traumatic stress disorder?
Yes. And similar to you, it took me a long time to actually believe that. It took me years to really, truly believe I was drugged.
And we're going to talk about this a little bit more towards the end, but you are still dealing with issues from this, and we're going to talk about that. But what took you so long to come to the conclusion, I have post-traumatic stress disorder, were our two friends, guilt and shame.
Yes.
And so, but remember, and again, this is in season 1 where Dr. Pettit comes on and talks about PTSD, and we ask him, what is trauma? And his answer to that question is, trauma is any event that pushes your brain outside of what the experts call a window of tolerance. Now, we were celebrating your 30-something birthday by then. By then, you had already had thyroid cancer and been through some other trauma. Why was this one, in your opinion, the one that pushed you outside the window of tolerance?
If this is a window of tolerance, this one shattered my window. And the best I can explain why it did is because it is the first time that someone purposefully harmed me.
Yeah.
So I had been in horrible car accidents. I had thyroid cancer. That's not someone's intention to harm me. And it broke all the, if I do these things, I can stay safe from bad people.
So for those listeners out there who don't understand why they have been through so many things and then yet one thing pushes them into a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress or an undiagnosis of post-traumatic stress, I think that's a really good way to put it. And even since you and I have been prepping for this interview, it seems like that kind of landed like, oh, this is a spot for me.
Yes. And so for my personality, because I am a worst case scenario type person and I keep my world into
Enneagram 6, y'all.
Right. Into tight control, when the pattern of if I do this, I can stay safe, when that broke, it made everything unsafe. And so that's why it shattered my window of tolerance, not because this event was worse than a terrible car accident or thyroid cancer. Anything could be the thing that shatters your window of tolerance. It just depends on, I think a lot of it might be personality or when it hits or any number of things. For me, this one left me reeling.
Which is a great segue into my next question, because I think listeners need to hear about this. How are you doing now? And how does this event affect you today? Because, and I want you to spend some time here, about 4 or 5 minutes, because, and you're going to hear me silent, because people need to hear how when you get pushed out your window of tolerance, it can still affect you.
Yes. That was April, and by September, you had moved in with me. So, and I have always said it takes me a long time before I start to process things. So right about the time I would have processed this event,
it happened with me.
We went straight into your trauma. And so I ignored it for quite some time. Now, I immediately started having panic attacks after this event. So the immediate effect was uncontrolled panic attacks. Immediately I had to be medicated. But the further complications would not happen for years. So I did start to have panic attacks immediately. But the flashbacks did not begin for years. And those...
Tell us about those flashbacks.
I still have those today.
Do you mind telling us about your flashbacks?
My flashbacks are, I wake up in the middle of the night. I am not panicked. It is very odd. I'm very calm. But I sit straight up in bed. Sometimes I hop straight out of bed. And I am sure that I have swallowed something. Anything from, I've swallowed a Lego, a bottle cap, a fireball, a needle, poison, pills, pencils, all things that it normally, obviously not something that I would ever put in my mouth, period. I've never, ever swallowed any of those things, really, so.
Yeah, you had a good mama who told you not to put those things.
So it's very odd, and it's very odd things, but I think that even makes it stranger that I wake up and my immediate thought is, okay, I've swallowed this. I need to, what do I do next? Should I go ahead and try to call 911? Or, I go through all these thoughts of, okay, how do we deal with this? And minutes and minutes and minutes go by before I finally look at the clock and realize it's 3:00 in the morning. The chances that I got up and ate a Lego are slim.
So in that vein, and that's just one of the things, right?
Yes.
As an Enneagram 6, and I talk about the Enneagram a lot because I think it fascinates me, but nothing worse could have happened to your personality. I don't care whether it's you're someone 39 isn't exactly who God made you, or you're an Enneagram 6. Nothing worse could have happened.
Correct.
What frustrates you the most about the event? So we just talked about the flashback, and that's a frustration for sure. But what frustrates you the most about it?
Most is that it categorically, my personality changed. My tolerance of a lot of chaotic noise or a lot of conversations at the same time, it's like my brain can't handle it now because it feels out of control. So everything that feels out of control suddenly it just makes my brain go haywire. I used to be fine going in a taxi, but now that out of control, they're driving and I'm not in control, all those things that normally I'd be like, cool, let's go. We're in New York City. Let's grab a cab. Everything is different, and that makes me angry. It makes me angry and sad and mad and all of those things. Just, I don't want to have categorically changed, but I have. Yeah. But the flip side is that having had horrible panic attacks all day, every day for a long period of time, my empathy and my understanding of trauma.
Do you think that's why you walk with me so well?
Could be. I don't know. I don't know. But I do know that the Lord has used it. There's a loss there. There's a loss of who I was, but there's also a recognition of the Lord is using who I am now. There's no loss to him.
Right. And one of those things that your mom, taught me was, God isn't wringing his hands up in heaven over that.
Yes.
One of the things that, as walking alongside you, has been hard to watch is the years and years and years of guilt and shame.
Yes.
Can you talk about that for a few minutes for us? Because, the clinical definition of shame is, and by the way, let me go on record to say you did not make a mistake. But shame, often the clinical definition is I made a mistake. And so in your mind, for so many years, you thought you made a mistake that night and that you deserved this. And I would love to hear you talk about that a little bit and talk us through it and talk us how you get back to the truth.
For me, and this is probably not the correct definition of either word, but for me, the guilt is I shouldn't have been there. I shouldn't have been drinking. That's guilt for me. I should have made different choices. Mm-hmm. The shame for me is that some man looked at me and said, "You are worthless." And had
you ever felt that before?
No, but the lie that Satan insinuates in there is all of your friends and family are lying.
You're not awesome.
You're not awesome. He saw you for 2 seconds and saw straight through to your worthlessness. That's who you are. See, somebody outside of the picture, that's who can really see. That's the lie. That's the lie I fight every day. Is that somebody saw the truth. I'm not worth anything. As a matter of fact, you can just die. Because that's just about what he did to me.
Oh, yeah, it's a miracle that you're
not. I
not.
maybe had 2 sips of that drink. And that's how sick I got. And he didn't care. He saw me as worthless. And it is a lie. I know it's a lie. But boy, Satan's got a good trick up his sleeve with that one.
Do any of our 3 C's that we talk about so much on our podcast, and but since this is the first episode of the second season, some people may not have heard the first season, but we focus strongly on church, on community, and on trauma-informed counseling. Have any or all of those helping you? Because you are actively still walking through this, as am I.
Yes.
And we do that together. We walk through trauma together. Any of those 3 C's help you?
All of them. But the main one in this case would be counseling. It is not something that I necessarily readily share. And honestly, there's not really a support group. There's, grief share, and there's divorce care, and there's celebrate recovery.
There's not, I got drugged care share.
Yes, right. And so, and that's not a knock on anybody or anything. It's just, I don't know where to get support other than counseling. And in this case, again, that one-on-one talking through has been imperative for this situation, for me to unpack why it continues to haunt me, why it has caused really a shift in my personality, and all of those things. Counseling, I think, is the only way to walk through for this situation. I think I don't know a way around that.
Because even had this not pushed you into PTSD or pushed you outside that window of tolerance, you still would have had that guilt and shame that our generation brought up the way we were brought up would have felt anyway.
And the panic attacks.
And I
had to get some very
medication.
Clear, and clear help and coping skills for panic attacks that, you just can't go up to your regular average person and be like, can you give me the top 10 things that you can do for a panic attack? And really, again, that goes back to counseling.
Let me ask you this, and I know the answer to this, and so does everybody else, but for those of you who are listening, the other thing that we focus on, and the whole reason why we do the podcast, is to focus on the star of the story, who is Jesus. Yes. Do you believe in the star of the story?
Absolutely.
Where was he that night?
God, this is a hard one, guys. I know this is not true, but I still struggle with feeling like I got exactly what I deserved. And that is, so I don't feel like he wasn't there. I feel like he was like, well, here's what you get for being there doing that. And that is wrong. Let me reiterate that a million times. I am wrong.
And oftentimes we have to tell you that you're wrong.
Yes.
Again.
I know I'm
and
wrong.
again.
I know I'm wrong. But I don't have any feeling of, where were you, God? Or sadness, or I just feel like, yeah. Nope.
Do you feel resigned to live the rest of your life?
Yeah. It just, I cannot seem to clear that from my brain.
And as someone who is walking alongside you, again, this podcast is for those people too. We will walk on.
Yes.
Note
that we're at year 12 of this, and I know the truth. I just still continue to struggle. There is not a moment that I think, where were you, God, at all? I just honestly think he was like, here you go. Right. How about it? You went there.
And we call that there's two sides of the brain, the emotional and the logical.
Yeah.
And you're all logical normally, but that part is the emotional.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone in your position who is actively walking through trauma? And I say all the time on this podcast, and I know I have people who listen to our podcast who do not believe in the star of the story, who do not believe in Jesus. And usually this question is going to be more formed differently, but I'm going to ask it to you in a special way. Let's just pretend all of that you think in that non-logical part of your brain is true. Have you forgiven yourself for going there that night then?
No, I haven't.
Do you think that's important?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, that was kind of a Captain Obvious question.
Obvious. Welcome, Captain Obvious. Yes. Yeah, there's just still some broken pieces there. And it's interesting to me because I have been in counseling and I have worked really hard to get my way through this. And it is just one traumatic event. And I guess if I can encourage anyone, if you are years out from some event and still finding yourself struggling with it, throw yourself some grace.
Yeah.
I have worked hard to get past this, and I still have, these are just wrong thoughts, that it's my fault, that God was waiting in heaven to throw a lightning bolt my way, and this is what I deserved. These are still broken thoughts in my head, and it's been years. And so if you are struggling and you feel like, my gosh, that was years ago, grace upon grace, and continue to get help, continue to talk about it, continue to work your way through it. Because as you mentioned, just getting prepared for this, a lot of this has come up. And
for both of us.
Yeah. Here we are years later, and I'm still going, I still feel that way. Still feel like I got what I deserved. And I'm still wrong on that.
And so I'm going to sit across the table from you, and I'm going to say some words that I say on every podcast. And I can't look at you because you're going to make me cry. But you are so precious in the sight of God, and you are seen, you are known, you are loved, you are heard, and you are so valued. And I'm so grateful for your voice. As we step into season 2 for the podcast, you're going to be on a lot, because one of the things that you don't see that I see, and that people listening out there hear, is wisdom that has come from this suffering. I didn't know you well before this, but what I know is that you have such wisdom and such grace, and you will get there, and maybe we'll bring you on for an update. But I don't want this podcast to be all rainbows and butterflies. People see my picture all over social media, and they're like, "Oh, she looks good now." But the fact of the matter is that trauma doesn't always go away. God doesn't always choose to take it, and in both of our cases, He has not chosen to take it.
Yes, and for anyone who is in the throes of it's the days are just so dark. It doesn't feel like it'll ever get better. I remember those days with you.
Yeah.
And feeling like, I just don't see any way out that this is ever going to get better. And it does. Hang in there. It really does get better. The Lord is faithful. We say that, but really hear the words. He is faithful. Don't give up. Every day is a new day. And Mom always says it's a bad day, not a bad life.
Let me ask you this. And people ask me this sometimes, and we'll close with this. If you had to choose between what the Lord has given you through this trauma, the depth of wisdom and the really falling down at his feet, would you trade it?
No, I'd do it again. I mean, I'd let it happen again. Or, if God said you get to choose not to let that happen or to let it happen, I'd absolutely. It has been hard, but it has changed my perspective on so many things, and that is good.
And it's an eternal perspective.
Yeah.
And that eternal perspective is the only one that matters, and it's why we're here. So, Christy, thank you so much for coming today. I know this was not easy for you, and I know that your heart was to help other people. And so I'd just like to thank you so much for your candor, for your bravery, and for your sacrifice to coming onto the show today.
Thank you for those kind words, and I am grateful for the opportunity to get to share my story, and I do indeed hope it helps.
Well, guys, that was certainly a powerful story, and I'd like to thank our guest for coming on today, because I know from experience that getting behind a microphone and telling story of such pain is not always easy. And so I am so grateful to our guest for doing that today. I would also like to thank Phil Baker. That's his song playing us out of the podcast, a song called Marked by You. You can find him on iTunes, and that song in particular is found on his album called Babylon. I am so honored, as always, that you continue to take the time to listen to our message of hope and healing. Season 2 is the healing zone, as we mentioned. This is the place where I hope that you walk away with some hope in your heart, because we believe that healing people help people. And because of that, I would love to invite you to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, rate and review it. This helps us get the word out, helps keep the podcast coming up in search engines so that we can get this into the earbuds of people that need it. If you need me, I am easy to find on all social media. Just Google Wednesdays with Watson and you'll find me in all of the places. When you get there, though, make sure that you hit all those buttons, like and share, and everything that just continues to help us get the message out. We will see you in a couple weeks, 2 weeks to be exact, and until then, let the healing continue.
So let my life glorify you and teach me to walk beside